Good evening and welcome to my How Healthy Are You weekly educational call. My name is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist, and I'm going to start the call by talking about some more COVID-19 data. So this is factual data that was pulled from research publications. It was all put together by Dr. Michael Greger, who's an MD, but this isn't his research. This is pulled from numerous publications. What he found is that the severity of COVID-19 cases, meaning whether you need a ventilator and go into the emergency room of a hospital or all the way up to death, it varies quite a bit with your pre-existing conditions. So pre-existing conditions, an example would be high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, COPD. Those are the main ones. Also diabetes and obesity. So these issues, pre-existing conditions, have a big effect on how well a person either survives COVID-19 or just how much stress it puts on their body. So if someone has high blood pressure, they're 2 times more likely to have to go to the hospital and have experience severe symptoms. If they have cardiovascular disease, that goes from 2 times to 3 times. If it goes all the way up to COPD, it's 6 times. So they're 6 times more likely to have to go to the hospital. Diabetes also increases the severity of the COVID-19 response in the body. Obesity is a 7 times more severe. So it's even worse than having COPD. And the issue with obesity is because it comes with a lot of inflammation. And one thing I noticed from these studies is the underlying factor was related to inflammation. So reducing inflammation seems to be a key to surviving COVID-19 and also not to have it affect you as much. So in all the cases, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, COPD, diabetes, all will have a result of inflammation. So inflammation just follows with all of those pre-existing conditions. Now, there's a couple pre-existing conditions that really aren't pre-existing conditions. It relates to the severity of COVID-19, but there's not much we can do about it. And one of those is air pollution, and that's the air pollution of the city that you live in. And it has a great correlation with COVID-19 deaths. But there's also a paradox here, because when the pollution's really bad and it's killing people on a regular basis, as a result of the lockdown, people's lives were actually saved because the air quality improved when people stopped driving cars as much and when the factories shut down. So when air pollution diminished, not only were the COVID-19 deaths diminished, but also overall death rates went down in the most polluted cities. This was mainly seen in China, where pollution is a big problem. The pollutant that was studied were the classification known as nitric oxides, but the same is true in the United States. It was kind of ironic that locking down the country actually had the effect of saving lives strictly because of pollution. So the thing that happened studying the data was related to high blood pressure. High blood pressure is a result of inflammation, and I mentioned that inflammation is a link here. It's a common thread with COVID-19 severity. The high blood pressure drugs are normally known as ACE inhibitors, and they tend to reduce inflammation. So these drugs, even though they would tend to reduce inflammation, the way they work, it makes one more susceptible to viral attack and thus COVID-19 virus attack. So that was one of the reasons that added to having high blood pressure being or resulting in a double severity, a 2-time severity. Not only the inflammation due to high blood pressure, but the drugs most people take makes one more susceptible. Another drug that was told not to take, that we were all told not to take, ibuprofen. In general, it's much better, it was found, to use a cold compress because fever tends to help the human body fight off an infection. It's sort of a catch-22 because when there is an infection, the body raises its internal temperature. Now, as long as that temperature doesn't kill you, which is extremely rare, that slightly elevated body temperature, known as a fever, allows us to fight an infection much more strongly. So the use of ibuprofen in general wasn't considered good, but it's also better if one has a fever with COVID-19 to just cool the body without medication, at least externally cool the body with a cold compress, because you really want the low-grade fever. It helps you fight an infection. Now, the final factor that we have no control over is our age, and this data was absolutely confirmed. Everything we're hearing in the news about COVID-19 affecting the elderly more than the young people has been confirmed. So people in their 30s and 40s, the mortality rate is only 1 in 1,000. And I mentioned some of these numbers last week when I talked about mortality rates. 1 in 1,000, that's quite a low percentage. These are people in their 30s and 40s. But it decreases, or at least gets more severe as one ages, because people in their 50s to 60s, the mortality rate was 1 in 200. Again, about 0.5%, less than 1%, far less than the numbers we were told 3 or 4 months ago. But where the numbers get very bad is for people in their 80s, and that's 1 out of 5 chance of mortality, which is 20%. It's huge. So this is why we're seeing the elderly die from COVID-19. It's hard to say whether they would have died in the past few months from something else anyway. Really hard to tell, but the numbers we have, 1 out of 5. People that are in general in the U.S. over 65, it's a pretty good link or range to determine elderly. It's when we can start collecting Medicare. So we'll use 65 as a number. When you're older than 65, a 3 to 1 greater chance of having to be hospitalized. So these numbers really increase with age. So what can you do? Well, the best thing is to consume foods that lead to a reduction in inflammation. And by doing so, these are the same foods that would reduce your blood pressure, reduce your cardiovascular disease, reduce your COPD, reduce your obesity, reduce your diabetes. So back to the same thing, whole foods, fruit and vegetables tend to be your best way to minimize the chance that COVID-19 will have a severe effect on you. Now, I always add to that, there are other ways to not only decrease inflammation, but to increase your immune system strength and activity, and that's from consuming fresh sprouts. And sprouts are really a plant before a leaf forms. So you'd have to pretty much grow your own. If you're not doing that, the best way is with Steromax, taking 3 Steromax every day, about 30 minutes before your first meal of the day, is an excellent way to keep your immune system strong through your white blood cell strength and activity. But in addition to that, I still recommend consuming plenty of whole foods, whole fruits, whole vegetables. So that's what I have for an introduction. I'm going to take the call off lecture mode. So I'm going to open up the call to questions. Do we have any questions this evening? I guess not. Well, I appreciate everyone's attention, and next week I may have even some more data type information on COVID-19 above and beyond what's in the newspapers. Let me know if you want to keep hearing this sort of data. And until then, I wish everyone a happy and healthy week. I'll be doing this call again next week, same time. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.